Hey everyone. So the Mueller Report is out, not in its entirety, but we've seen enough of it to realize that it's a devastating portrait of abuse of power by a president. But what has also emerged from the Mueller Report are some false narratives, false notions, ideas that need to be addressed because, frankly, they're not true. I've identified 4 bogus ideas that have emerged from the Mueller Report, and let's talk about them one by one. Number 1, there can be no obstruction of justice without an underlying crime. This idea, put forth by defenders of Trump, is a complete red herring. There is nothing in the law to suggest that you have to have committed a particular crime to be guilty of obstructing an investigation into that crime. People impede an investigation for any number of reasons, as Mueller pointed out in his report. The most noteworthy is people fear that even if I haven't committed crime X, they're going to find crime Y and crime Z if they continue to investigate this. That's one of the reasons why people obstruct justice. I may have committed a bank robbery, but you're investigating me for a murder I didn't commit. Well, I don't want you to follow through with that investigation because I don't want you to find out about the bank robbery. Another reason why politicians in particular obstruct justice is that they don't want political damage. They don't want to see, even if they're not found guilty of a crime, they don't want to see their political prospects damaged for the foreseeable future. Mob bosses routinely obstruct justice, even for crimes not done by them, the mob boss, but by their lieutenants, their underlings. They don't want to see their underlings put in criminal peril because those underlings are then more vulnerable to flipping on the mob boss. Likewise, Donald Trump had no great love for Mike Flynn, but he knew that if Mike Flynn got in trouble criminally, that eventually Flynn would flip on Trump and provide a treasure trove of information about him, as Bob Mueller has subsequently verified. And finally, let's take a look at the gold standard of presidential investigations, Watergate. In the Watergate case, there was no underlying crime. Now, I know you're looking at me saying, well, what are you talking about, Jeff? Men broke in to the offices of the Democratic National Committee at Watergate to steal documents. There's the crime. Yes, but the reality is there was never convincing evidence put forth that Nixon either ordered the crime or knew about the crime beforehand. John Dean doesn't believe he knew about it beforehand. Nixon's malfeasance, Nixon's cover-up, came after the Watergate crime was exposed. Nixon was not culpable for the break-in, but he didn't want people to find out about his other misdeeds, plotting to firebomb the Brookings Institute, sicking the IRS on his political opponents, the fact that people working on his behalf broke into the psychiatrist's office of one of his political opponents. Nixon didn't want any of that information coming out, but he was not, or at least has not been found to be responsible for the original crime. So the next time you hear somebody say, oh, there was no underlying crime, call BS on that. It's nonsense. Fake, phony, bogus narrative number 2. Trump was so inept and incompetent that none of his attempts to obstruct came to fruition. Well, this is complete nonsense. Yes, it's true that certain of his subordinates, Don McGahn, Corey Lewandowski, refused to carry out Trump's orders. Don McGahn refused to put into play a series of events that might get Bob Mueller fired. Corey Lewandowski refused to communicate with Jeff Sessions to get him to unrecuse himself and once again become acting attorney general. But there were plenty of things that Trump did that did have an impact. his blandishments, his support of Michael Cohen, slowed down Michael Cohen being willing to testify truthfully to investigators by months. Cohen was told, "We'll take care of you." And for a while, that led him to participate in a cover-up along with Trump. When he testified before a congressional committee and told the committee that Trump's involvement with the Trump Tower in Moscow had ended long before it actually had ended, that was a lie perpetrated because he knew that was what Donald Trump wanted him to say. Likewise, Trump's winks and nods in the direction of Paul Manafort caused Paul Manafort never to fully cooperate with federal investigators. Yes, Manafort did sign a cooperation agreement, but he never really followed through on it. He continued to lie to investigators and also served as a double agent for Trump. He would go back to Trump and tell them the kinds of questions that investigators were asking. Further, when Trump began to heap praise on Paul Manafort, just as the Manafort jurors in Alexandria, Virginia, were about to start deliberating, that's a form of obstruction of justice. Trump is the highest law enforcement officer in the country, and he's heaping praise on somebody who is on trial? Completely inappropriate, complete abuse of power. And let's not forget Trump's bullying and badgering of Michael Cohen after Michael Cohen did agree to testify truthfully. Trump then took after Cohen's father-in-law, offering innuendo after innuendo about criminality on the part of his father-in-law. Well, this, again, coming from a president of the United States, is obstruction of justice. So don't be beguiled into thinking that just because some of Trump's subordinates didn't follow through with his orders, that there was no obstruction of justice. There was plenty obstruction of justice. Now, bogus idea number 3 is a narrative that comes from my side of the political spectrum. That is, starting the impeachment process immediately would be a bad idea because the American people are not yet ready for impeachment. To that I say, nonsense. First of all, the impeachment process from start to finish is going to take about a half year, 6 months. 6 months is an eternity in political time. What starting the impeachment process would do right now is, first of all, it would be less likely to run afoul of the presidential election of 2020. First of all, that's an important thing. You can't be having an impeachment process right up to the election. Second of all, it would demonstrate to the American people the seriousness of this matter. It would cause them to pay attention in a way that they otherwise will not. And third of all, it will give the House Judiciary Committee added clout in terms of its subpoena power. It will now be a judicial entity acting in a judicial proceeding that will have access to grand jury testimony, the full range of what Mueller found out. And that will add to its power and its authority. Now, I have no doubt, given what we found out so far, that Trump will be impeached in the House. That's almost a certainty in my mind. But then, of course, there's a second stage to the process. Subsequently, a trial takes place in the U.S. Senate. One, by the way, that would be presided over by John Roberts of the Supreme Court. Then the question emerges, well, what will happen in the Senate? Well, that leads to my fourth bogus narrative. The fourth bogus narrative, typically put out by my Democratic compatriots, is that if Trump is acquitted in the Senate, it will create blowback against the Democrats and will hurt them politically in the 2020 elections. People buttress that argument by saying, look what happened to the Republicans when they tried to impeach Bill Clinton. All of which is to say that that argument is based on a phony equation between Trump's misdeeds and Clinton's misdeeds. Clinton was impeached because he lied about having oral sex with Monica Lewinsky. Trump will be impeached because he's been in bed with Vladimir Putin for over 3 years. The magnitude of those offenses is so different. This is such an apples and oranges comparison that it's absurd to even talk about those two impeachments in the same sentence. Trump is an individual who not only welcomed the assistance, welcomed the hacking, welcomed the disinformation from one of our geopolitical adversaries, he promoted their intrusion into our electoral process. He publicly asked the Russians to hack into the server of his political opponent. That in itself is an impeachable act. Right before the election, he went around campaigning and praised WikiLeaks 141 times. Let me remind everyone that we have just asked for the extradition of the head of WikiLeaks as a criminal and as a person who served as a cutout for Russian interests during the campaign. This is a person that Trump was praising right before the election. And once it became clear to virtually everybody that the Russians had in fact interfered with our electoral process, what did Trump do? He denied it. He trashed our intelligence community, did Putin's bidding, and in Helsinki said he believed not our intelligence community, but Vladimir Putin. He then did everything he could to stymie Bob Mueller's investigation into the causes of Russian hacking into our election. If that's not an impeachable act, I don't know what is. But my Democratic compatriots will say to me, yes, but Jeff, he's going to be acquitted by the Senate. The senators are not going to be brought along even by this abundant evidence. To which I say, that doesn't matter. There is a moral imperative placed upon the entire country right now to pursue this impeachment process to finality. Now, obviously, the most satisfying result and the most just result would be the removal of Trump from office. But I confess it would be satisfying also to see all of these Republican profiles of cowardice actually have to defend this president. The level of hypocrisy and deceit practiced by Trump's Republican supporters is rather breathtaking. Let's take a look at some of the things that important Republican figures said about Trump before the election. Let's start out with the person who's likely to be Trump's defense attorney during the impeachment trial in the Senate, Lindsey Graham. This is what Lindsey Graham said about Donald Trump in February of 2016. And I quote, "I'm not going to try to get into the mind of Donald Trump because I don't think there's a whole lot of space there. I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office." Well, Lindsey, you're a paragon of insight. Everything you've said is true. All I can ask is, what happened? Former Senator of Illinois, Mark Kirk, said this about Trump. "Donald J. Trump is a malignant clown, unprepared and unfit to be president of the United States." Or how about former governor of Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty, talking in 2016? "Although I'd hoped he could have risen to the occasion, it's clear Trump is unwilling or unable to demonstrate even the most basic level of discipline, character, and judgment necessary to lead our great nation. He is unsound, uninformed, unhinged, and unfit to be President of the United States, and I am withdrawing my support for him." Or how about that paragon of virtue from Colorado, Cory Gardner? Here's what he said in October of 2016. "Donald Trump is a candidate who shows a disgust for American character and a disdain for dignity, unbecoming of the presidency. His flaws are beyond mere moral shortcomings. Preach, Corey, preach. How about his chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, one of Trump's biggest boosters now? Listen to him days before the election in November of 2016. Yes, I'm supporting Donald Trump. I'm doing it as enthusiastically as I can, given the fact that he's a terrible human being. Tell it, Mick, tell it. What happened? And finally, how about Ted Cruz? It's almost a lead pipe certainty that Ted Cruz will be one of Trump's greatest defenders in the Senate. But back in 2016, he called Trump a sniveling coward and said, Trump is a narcissist at a level that I don't think this country has ever seen. Tell it, Ted. Now, it's worth noting that by the time 2018 had rolled around, Ted was writing a laudatory piece for Time magazine on Donald Trump as one of the 100 most influential people in the country. The spinelessness, the lack of integrity of these people is breathtaking. Let me sum up by saying, I don't think we're going to see the likes of this kind of malfeasance in office again in our lifetime. We may not see it in the next 100 years. Frankly, we've never seen anything like it. But it is important, in my view, that the Democrats in particular and the country as a whole put down a marker that this level of malfeasance by a president is intolerable. We will not let it pass by unchecked, and we will pursue impeachment proceedings at their fullest, regardless of the level of Republican undermining of the process. So the next time you hear somebody offer one of these 4 faux narratives, call BS on them. I'm Jeff Rowan. Thanks for watching.